Hello all, welcome to SpamHouse's webinar on email filtering. I'm just going to put it out there right at the beginning. I am having some technical difficulties today, so I apologise if I drop off and I'm not seen. The gremlins are really on my back today, so apologies if I suddenly disappear, but you are in the capable hands of Carol and Manuele. So in moving on to Carol and Manuele, Manuele has really been working with email infrastructure probably longer than he cares to admit to. He's our Chief Technical Officer, and he'll be taking the deep dive with you today, along with Carol. Now, Carol spends most of his time investigating how a bad actor's infrastructure operates, and he ensures that internet users are protected from their nefarious activities. He focuses particularly on reputation across all internet resources, IP and domain, etc. And he's our data geek. Let's call him that for now. Now, just before I hand over to Skull and Carol, I'd like to mention we are going to be having a Q&A session at the end of this webinar. I've opened the Q&A session now, so if you want to ask any questions, feel free, put them in there as they come up, and we'll answer them all at the end. And in the meantime, I'll hand you over to Carol.
Thank you, Sarah. Good day, everyone. Let's see what we'll cover today. We'll look into the various stages where you can use the DNSBLs to be offered. For example, the initial connection, what the benefits there are. We'll look at how to use them during the pre-data phase, and that will cover anything between the initial connection and the data command being issued during the STP transaction, and what kind of benefits can be gained over there. And then we'll look at how they can be used during the post-data phase, so that's when you actually have the entire email in your hands, and what kind of benefits and gains can be held there. Finally, we'll look at the plugins that we published, which will make the use of the data a lot easier, and we'll do our Q&A. So let's start at the stages first. The first one here that we'll look at is just looking at the initial connection. This is basically the moment where an external mail server or an external machine connects to your mail server, and all you have is an open connection. You know the IP where the connection is coming from. Nothing else has happened yet. This is the initial connection phase, and where basically all we have to work with is the IP address that created the connection. Then secondly, we will look at the pre-data phase and see how we can use the data that we have right there, and analyze the various parts of how the STP transaction is being set up, what we can do there. And then finally, we will take a look at the post-data phase and work with the entire email and apply all the various reputation sets that we offer to that entire email, and work with it there. So basically that will be the content inspection of the email, whereas the rest is sort of the transaction phase, the metadata phase of the email itself. And to talk you through the first part, I'll hand it over to Emanuele.
Yes, thank you, Carol, and hello, everyone. So we are, as Carol said, at the connection stage. This is where as Carol said, only the connection IP. Is that enough to already make a choice? Maybe, it may not be. Of course, it depends on where that connection is coming from. For example, if it is a known offender that you see that is already abusing your network in some ways, for example, it is already trespassing your rate limits, and it is also considered a bad source by some DNSBL in our case, what you can do is just query that IP against our data, already make a decision and decide that, well, since this guy is particularly prolific in terms of abuse towards my network, I know that this is also a known bad actor, so I'm dropping it. The word dropping also suggests how this treatment, so to say, is probably best applied for seriously bad offenders, such as the one that you can find in our drop list. And for those who don't know our drop list, go and check our website. But basically, it has been around for, I would say, almost a couple of decades by now. And it is a do not route or peer type of list, meaning that all the networks that are supposed to end up in there are either bulletproof hostings or hijacked networks that really nothing good comes out of it. So you can possibly safely apply a rejection even at this stage without caring too much about what they're trying to do. Keep in mind, this is a very aggressive measure. And it is aggressive because at this stage, if you reject the message, you only know where the message is trying to come from. You haven't received the sender of the message. You haven't received the intended recipient of the message. And that is why if you try to do that, at this stage, the amount of information you have in your logging is going to be very minimal. The data set that you can use for these lookups are, of course, all the ones that revolve around IP reputation. So in our case, you have available the SBL that is mostly about machines that are being used for various types of abuse, but also for a jacked IP space, as we said. Then you have the policy block list, the PBL, where you basically find an indication of whether or not this IP belongs to a network that is expected to run any mail server. And in a way, you can see that as an indication that the message is coming from something that is not supposed to contact you, and therefore you may want to take action against it. And finally, you have the XBL, the exploit block list. That is a collection on IPs that show indicators of infection. And as you certainly know, a lot of the spam that you receive nowadays comes from compromised machines of various sorts that connect to you directly and push spam your way. I must say, one additional step that you can do at this stage is, of course, also running a reverse DNS lookup for the IP that is connecting to you. That provides you, assuming that IP has a proper DNS setting, that provides you with a host name. And of course, you can do something about that host name too, but we'll speak about that at the next stage.
Right, so let's look at benefits of using the DNSBLs at this stage. Mostly there's a great amount of noise you can keep away, and by not handling those connections to the full extent. In total, there's a big reduction in the amount of resources that you use, the amount of concurrent connections that you have open, and it's really a tool against the heavy abuse and the things where you say, okay, like the IPs that are on PBL, you really don't expect any legitimate mail coming from there in any case. And conceptually, it's actually best to think about it of like a dynamic firewall for SNTP, because it really keeps the worst of the worst outside of the door. And obviously, the flip side of that is that since you don't see the traffic, you don't have any chance to inspect the traffic to the full extent and say, well, maybe I would like to have this after all. But this is basically to deal with the sort of the worst offenders out there. And so yeah, it is the one thing there is to make sure that you know what you reject, and because you're lacking full logging of the entire email message. Let's move on to the next phase, and that would be using the DNSBLs during the pre-data phase. This covers everything that comes in after the connection has been made, the connection has been set up, and before the data command is issued.
Yes. I don't know how much the attendees of this webinar are into the details of the SMTP protocol, so I'm going to be very basic in my explanation here. So bear with me. I'm sorry if you know more and possibly even more than I do. But the very next thing that is going to come in is the hello string. Now, if you remember from the previous stage, we were left with the reverse DNS lookup in our hands. So as we said, the very first thing that we can do with that IP, with the reverse DNS of that IP, is grab its hostname and check it against domain reputation data set. That in our case is either the DBL that is going to tell you whether or not the domain is known to be bad or as being recently observed in related with abuse on our side. And the ZRD. The ZRD being the zero reputation block list. That is basically just a list of domains that are extremely new. And by extremely new, I mean have not seen any usage before the last 24 hours. You may wonder why that. Well, as a matter of fact, that has to do with the life cycle of most domains. Many domains just get registered for the sole purpose of abusing it. That means that they're going to stay silent and not in use for when they're registered until they're actually used. They're used in some cases even for just a couple of minutes and then just thrown away. So even the fact that you're observing activity from an IP that is so brand new is, well, of course, not necessarily an indication that something nasty is going on, but it may be treated as an additional indication in your further analysis down the line. Now, as we said, at this point, we also receive the hello command. The hello command comes with a hostname. That is supposed to be the hostname of the sending machine. So the next thing that you can do is at this stage is to compare that very host name with the host name that is announced by the reverse DNS of the IP. That has, of course, nothing to do with our data, and you shouldn't be particularly aggressive about that. It doesn't necessarily mean much, except maybe that the sender is a bit sloppy in their DNS configuration. Or maybe that there is some transient problem with the DNS serving the reverse record. So it doesn't necessarily mean too much, but it is something that you may want to pick up as an information and add to your scoring system if you're assuming you're using one. But of course, with that same hostname that you find in the hello string, you can query that against the DBL and ZRD as well. And just as before, you can treat the fact that it is very new as an indication that something may be going on and be a little bit more aggressive in your filtering of that message. In the case it is listed by the DBL, particularly if it is listed as a bad domain, well, for many people, for many of our users, even that is just an indication strong enough to decide that they're not going to accept the message. You can do that at this stage. We suggest not. We'll see that later why. But the very next thing that is going to happen in your SMTP connection is that you are going to receive the mail from command. And the mail from command comes with the email address of the sender, of course. Email address of the sender that, of course, contains a domain name, the domain name of the sender. And that is, again, something that you can and should check against the DBL and, again, possibly the ZRD. But even the email address itself can be queried against our data, or for say better, not really the email address per se. What you should do is normalize it, apply a hash function over it, and query the hash function against our hash block list. And if you are not familiar with what the hash block list is, It is basically a container where we put hashes, of course, of various types of tokens inside. We find inside abusive messages, and for this specific case, email addresses related with abuse is one of them. So checking if the sender is listed by the HPL is one additional thing that you can do. And just like before, you can decide that that is enough to take action and reject the message, refuse the message, or maybe add scoring to your system, whatever you want to do. That is up to you. But the next thing that is going to happen in the SMTP communication is that we are starting to receive what the intended recipient of the message is through the RCPT2 command. What happens here is that if the message has one recipient, you are going to receive one single command, RCPT2 command with that recipient. If it has multiple recipients, you're going to receive multiple RCPT2 commands with one recipient each. And in reply to that, you can provide a return code. That return code will be either, okay, I'm fine with it, go ahead, or a rejection return code. Now, this is interesting because at this point you have all the informations that are related with this very message. So there are two things that you can do here. The first one is that even though you may have already decided in the previous steps that you are going to refuse the message and you're not going to accept it, refusing the message at this stage after they told you who the intended recipient is will provide you all the logging information you need in order to debug this very connection if somebody like the sender or even more relevant, the recipient, tell you that they were expecting a message from somebody and that message apparently didn't make it through. You will find the information in your logs. If you refuse the message before reaching this stage, that won't happen. The next thing that you can do is decide that, for example, some recipients are going to be excluded from filtering. So even though the message, your system already decided that the message is going to be rejected, you can reject it for all the recipients but one, for example, and that only recipient will get the message unfiltered. That can be useful, for example, for role addresses. Like a typical example is the abuse address at your domain that you want to be able to receive stuff that would be otherwise be rejected if directed to normal users. This is something that you can do even though you may not receive, you decide not to receive the entire message for all recipients and decide about them later.
Thank you, Sko. So the advantages here are mostly the same as in the previous case. There's a general reduction in the use of resources, bandwidth, memory storage, things like that. And not to forget storage of the actual messages you would otherwise accept. The message that you really don't want, you shouldn't really spend the money on storing it either and flooding the spam folders. There's an important thing to consider here is that this is really a way of protecting your infrastructure and where you are dealing with the majority of the bad email coming in a very resource friendly manner and not having to go through the full content analysis, not having to go through analyzing all the attachments that there may be. And so at this point, there's a really, this is a really good way to get rid of the majority of the bad traffic, especially if you run a larger infrastructure where you have thousands or even tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of users. It might be that a specific campaign will look like this just comes out of nothing, and it will hit you with a lot of open connections at the same time, a lot of mail coming in at the same time, and this is a great way of dealing with those cases to reduce the load that spikes like that cause. And it also, I mean, a lot of the really bad mail that comes in can be dealt with in this way. You don't always need to analyze the full content to be sure that you're dealing with something that you really don't want and get it out of the way. An important thing to mention here is that if you decide to reject at this stage of the connection, you will still prevent bounces being generated to people who were just innocent bystanders. So because the connection is still open, if you decide to not accept the email, the client that is connecting to you will get the rejection, and that's it. There's not going to be in sort of an out of session bounce that is going to hit whoever was forged in the email. And then I think another important thing to mention here is that often when we talk to people, they will say, well, yeah, you know, we should query the IP addresses against your data, right? Yeah, you should. But as you've just heard, there are a lot of other bits, and this is just in the initial connection phase of receiving the emails. There's a lot of other parts of that SDP conversation, part of that sort of that email metadata that you get, that you can query against our reputation data sets and get an idea of what kind of email you're dealing with and what kind of, if this is something you might not want to accept at all. And so it's really, the core is really to fully understand the process and to pick out all these little bits from the conversation and say, okay, this I'm going to apply here, this I'm going to apply here. And by that, you really utilize the data that we publish to the full level. One final remark here is that you've heard mentioned that, for example, you can check the reverse DNS, you can check the hello, and you can check the domain that is in the mail from against the domain-based DNSBLs. The great thing with domain reputation is that it is often possible to have domains be marked as bad and as a result be included in the data sets before they're actually being used. So this sort of closes the gap of, you know, which you would normally have where the systems are responding to a spam attack. Now they're a step ahead of the spam attack. So this is really important to close that gap, and domain reputation is a great way to deal with that and to make sure that you can get that very first spam and mark it as bad. Having said that, we will continue to the post data phase. So this is everything that will happen once the data command has been issued and the full contents and full headers of the email are being sent over, and Emanuele will talk you through that.
Indeed. So we were left off at the stage where we know what the intended recipients of the message are. At least one of them is going to receive this message. So what happens next is that our sender moves to the data command phase. The data command is actually just a single, blob in terms of transaction, in which the sender is going to provide us with the entire content of the email. And that contains both the headers of the message and the text of the message, the body of the message. So until now, what we have basically done is just looking at the envelope of the actual message. We didn't really read the contents. We didn't read anything inside the message itself. We're only being looking at who is sending it, who the post master of that mailbox is, and stuff like that. Now we're going through the content, and the very first thing that usually comes through, not necessarily in order, but it usually is the case, is all the received headers that this message has, that basically tell us all the previous hops that the message went through, all the previous mail servers. Why is that relevant? Well, it is relevant if we find in there indication that the message has been originated by known abuse sources. And there are basically two data sets that are helpful here. The first one is, again, the SBL. Usually, the fact that the message has been going through one IP that is in our SBL is relatively telling about the nature of the message. The next data set is actually OauthBL that many of you may not know, but it is basically a subset of the XBL. So compromised machines, and specifically the subset of compromised machines that are known to perform due to the bot they run, they are known to perform SMTP injection. So basically what we have here is bots that have the capability of connecting to legit mail servers and use stolen authentication credentials in order to push out spam through, well, a legit account, basically. The next thing that you're going to receive, assuming the message has it, is sometimes, of course, the reply to address. The reply to address is, of course, contains an email address. And just like the sender address in the envelope section of the message, what we can do about it is, of course, see where that resolves to, and see that the domain it points to, and see if that is contained in the DBL. And again, check the entire email address against the HBL. What is the type of usage you should expect here? Well, a good example here is the so-called 419 scams, often called the Nigerian prince scam. So that is those messages that I'm pretty certain everyone is familiar with, where somebody is basically proposing to give you a load of money that they found somewhere if you only help them with an initial, well, money transaction to help them cover the costs of retrieving that money. Now, why is that relevant? Because what those guys do is usually abuse a lot of email credentials throughout the place. They connect to legit mailboxes and they start pushing out spam out of them. So that spam is going to come at you from a lot of different directions, different servers, different sending IPs, different senders. But in order to be contacted back by the victims of their scam, what they do provide is an email address that is often reported as reply to. Sometimes it's not as only in the reply to, but it's also inside the body. Sometimes it's only in the body. And that is the contact address that they're going to rely on in order to keep the scam going. So it is something that you're always going to find inside the message. Well, you're often going to find inside this type of message, at least. So it is a very important and useful hook to reputation. So you can check that against the email component of the HBL and see if we know that that is related with something nefarious going on. Similarly, for the sender header or the from header, they both contain email addresses and they should be subject to exactly the same thing. Next, we have any URL that is inside the body. Again, those URLs contain a host name, so you can pick up that host name and check them against the DBL and the ZRD and see what they have to tell you about whether they are associated with known abuse because they're bad, or maybe because they're known to have been compromised, or they're just too brand new to be trustworthy and stuff like that. As we said, you should also extract any email address that is inside the body, or as a matter of fact, in general, inside the message, including all the headers in that. And what you can do with them is, again, check them against the DBL for the domain part, against the HBL for the entire address. Something additional that you can do is also extract any attachment that the mail is coming with and generate their hashes and check those hashes against the HBL, the file component of the HBL. One thing I should leave is also checking the any crypto wallet address that you may find inside the message body. Why is that? As a matter of fact, you are probably familiar with the so-called sextortion scams. That is where somebody, it's usually botnets, send you a message saying that, well, they managed to record you doing naughty stuff in front of your computer camera while watching a porn site or stuff like that. And they're threatening to release the video unless you pay them money on this Bitcoin address. It should be pretty clear that that Bitcoin address is being controlled by the people running this scam. So extracting that crypto wallet address, normalizing it again, hashing it, and checking it against the proper component of the HBL is going to provide you yet another hook in order to protect you and your users from this type of messages. Now, we said about hashing and checking attachments that come with the message. Let me be clear. This is not supposed to be a replacement for any antivirus strategy that you have in place. It's just meant to help. And the reason why we put that out, even though it may seem redundant, because everyone at this point has antivirus protection in place, or should have, is the fact that, well, it kind of comes for free because we already have the data, we observe what is coming in, but also because when something new comes in, it may be something, that's not always the case, of course, but it may be something that is not yet detected by any antivirus engine out there. We have the ability, due to our distribution infrastructure, to publish the information we collect about messages in a very, very short time. And what I mean is within a few seconds from the first site. And letting our users know that this file, this attachment, is related with something nefarious that is going on, allows people to have yet another layer of protection. That, given how relevant and how damaging this type of threat can be, I mean, it may be a little help, but it certainly helps. And it certainly makes no harm either. So we suggest to do it. One last thing, if you look at the left side of the slide, you see that at this point we made all this analysis, but the connection with the sender has been kept open the entire time. Now, just like Carl said in the previous slide, once you close the connection, you lose the ability to reject the message. And that is because if you reject the message after closing that connection, what you are supposed to generate is a bounce that is going to go to the envelope sender of that of the current SMTP transaction. And that envelope sender can easily be spoofed. And the more spammy the message is, the higher the chance it is that the sender is spoofed. So if you do that, all you're going to do is just send the so-called backscatter to an innocent victim whose address has been picked up by some spammer. So you shouldn't do that. But if you, as long as you keep the connection open while you do the analysis, at this point you have the ability to just reject the message and prevent it from entering your network and your mailboxes in particular. If you decide that this is too heavy for your systems because of any reason that is related with the way your system is engineered or your load or anything that regards you, If you decide to close the connection before you have made a decision about what to do about the message, at this point, you should accept the message and deliver it. You can deliver it, of course, to a quarantine space. You can deliver it to a spam folder. That is up to you, but you should deliver it. Because at this point, there is no way we can inform this, no reliable way we can inform the real sender of this message about what happened to the message itself. The only thing that is left is informing the recipient. So delivering it in a place where they can inspect it and even still see it if your decision ended up being wrong.
Okay, thank you. So having gone through this stage, let's look at what this brings us. Again, this is sort of on the same area as what we talked about earlier. There is a lot of extra catch rate you can have with our data if you apply it to all the bits where it can be applied. As you saw within the actual email, within the contents of the email, there are lots of parts that are fairly easy to extract and that are fairly easy to apply reputation to apply the intelligence we offer to once you've extracted them. And so there's the attachment, there's the email addresses, any domains you might find, and that will bring you quite a bit of extra catch rate over just looking at the connection itself with just IPs or domains. Another advantage of accepting the full message here, besides being able to do the full content scan, is that there's a little bit more information you can use for debugging and for seeing what might go wrong in cases where messages get marked in the wrong way, and that might be helpful at some point, especially if you're just sort of building out a new infrastructure. There is obviously it's best, if the moment you are sure that something is bad, that you don't want it, it's best to reject it. Just pushing everything, even if it's bad, to a spam folder. The spam folder is meant as a sort of a last resort where people go to find the things that are maybe questionable, that systems may not be entirely sure about. But if somebody's going to get 1,000 spams and we're going to dump those all in the spam folder, that sort of defeats the purpose there. So it's really best to get rid of everything that in general that we're sure about, to get that out of the user's way, to give them the users the best experience they can get, and also from a security point of view, to make sure that not when somebody opens the spam folder and then suddenly sees a mail with a convincing sort of a social hook to it that makes them click whatever attachment is in there. If we think it's bad, it should probably be put out of harm's way. So as you've seen so far, there's a lot of a lot you can do with our data, with the data that we publish in the DNSBLs, with more than just the IP address of the email that comes in. You may think at this point, wow, that sounds like a lot of work to implement all of this. Well, there's some good news, because we have done most of the work for you. We have 2 official plugins that we publish, one for SpamAssassin, one for our SpamD, which are both our popular platforms to deal with this. And these plugins basically take care of all of that. They will do all the things that we've talked about today, and they will do it in the right order and the right time, and they will take care of the extracting and everything and querying the right data sets at the right moment in time. And that will allow you to get great results. And it's not just us to say that. This is the Virus Bulletin has an ongoing testing of various spam filters, and this is the result that they get with the data that we publish, and applying it at the way where we say this is the intended use case of the data. Since it's data that we publish, there's always the option to be a little bit more aggressive, to apply certain things in a different way. But this is the way that we think works very well. This is the method where, for what we have designed the data for, the intended use case, so to say. And yeah, this is the way to use it. And by using the plugins, which we recommend you use the plugins, you will be sure that you use the right data at the right time, and that'll be that will help you achieve these good results.
Yes, to provide some additional context here, that score that you see there on the right side has been generated, is being obtained using the SpamAssassin implementation, but that doesn't really make much difference. Both the SpamAssassin and the RSpamD use all the concepts that you have seen so far. A couple of things that I want to point out here. The first one is that, of course, if you are building your platform for filtering and you want to rely on this, by all means, feel free. Consider them more as a starting point than as a finished product. So you are absolutely free to modify anything that you can find in there as it best fits your needs and your scenario. The other thing that I want to say is that you should, I assume you do, but you should understand and know the details about the tools that you decide to use for this. What I mean by that is that, as you've seen before, you can apply our data at several stages, and some stages are particularly easy to apply from the MTA itself. But if you use an engine, a filtering engine for all the content scanning, in this particular case, RSpamD is a perfect example, and that content scanning system has ability to self-learn from your traffic. If you start refusing things on a continuous basis from the MTA, what you're ending up doing is removing relevant signal from the spam flow that your filtering system could pick up in order to build a better view of what you receive. And what that means is that your filtering system, RSpamD specifically, will learn from the spam that you receive and learn from the intel it gets from us, so that if a particular type of spam keeps coming in from multiple sources and they're all listed, it will know and recognize that that specific content is associated with spam activity. And that will mean that when one sample comes in from an IP that is not listed by us yet, or not listed by any of the other lists that you use, well, that content scanner will be able, most likely, to identify the message for what it is and still filter it. On the other hand, if you are always blocking based on our data, then none of that will ever reach your content engine. And that will mean that it will not have the ability to learn from all the spam that is receiving, and therefore not be able to recognize the message as malicious once our data or any other data that you apply in the previous stages are able to filter it. So again, it's mostly about knowing the tools you decide to adopt and use them accordingly to the intended usage by their designer. And with that, I think we're over.
Almost. We'll just move on to the question and answer session now. So I have a question from Joe, and he said, I run an on-premise Exchange installation. Would I be able to use content filtering capabilities?
I'm picking this up. So as a matter of fact, I think that Exchange is, I'm no Exchange expert. Let me tell you this in the first instance. To my understanding and to my knowledge, Exchange is extremely limited in what it allows you to check for in the inside the SMTP phase itself. I think that it only allows to check for against IPs. So you can use ZAN, that is the combination of SBL, PBL, and XBL, but it has no ability to use all the domain data, all the hash data that we publish. For that, you would need an additional engine associated with your exchange, or you can run something separate, like a mail server using SpamAssassin or again AirSpamD. Put that in front of your exchange. So point the MX record to that intermediate box and have that box deliver the messages to the exchange. That is, to my knowledge, the only thing you can use our data to the full extent with Exchange.
Okay, right. Thanks there. I've got another one come in. Would using DMARC on all sending IP addresses on a mail server filter out the spam?
Shall we take that one? So what DMARC does is it actually, so DMARC works together with SPF and DKIM. SPF will tell you what IP addresses are allowed to send for a certain domain. DKIM sort of cryptographically signs if you know, it allows you to verify if whoever claims to sender actually is that sender. When DMARC, what DMARC does is it allows you to publish a policy of what to do when you have when those things don't match. Will you know, using that get rid of everything? No, because not all the email you're going to get is has an SPF record. All SPF adaptation is pretty good. DKIM adaptation isn't quite there yet. All the big senders will do it. All the big bulk mail senders will do it. All the free mail platforms will do it, I think. But there's, especially in the one-to-one and small business part of email, there is plenty of email left that is perfectly legit and that is not DKIM signed. And and at the same time, there's plenty of spam that has perfectly fine SPF records and perfectly signed DKIM set up. So yes, it will get rid of things that you don't want, but it is not does not get rid of everything that you might not want.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you. And then a question with regards to the SpamAssassin plugins. Does SpamAssassin plugins support XIM's pre-data phase? XIM's capable of querying configurable block lists in its ACL, but you recommended using our SpamHouse's SpamAssassin plugins even here.
Well, so let me be clear about the nature of those plugins, because you can call it plugins, but in the end, it's just some extensions that implement some functionalities that are not inside vanilla SpamAssassin, like support for DHBL, for example. But all the rest is just a SpamAssassin configuration. Again, it's a template, so feel free to fiddle with it and change it to your expectations. But it is just a standard SpamAssassin. It's nothing particularly fancy. About the support that XIM has to pre-data analysis and block list queries, well, I think that that was more or less the point of my previous intervention on this. That is, sure, you can do it. As a matter of fact, I've been doing that the entire time. I have been working as a postmaster for 20 years almost before joining SpamHouse. So there is no problem if you do that. But if you manage your SpamAssassin with self-learning capabilities, then the fact that you're taking away a portion of the traffic before it reaches SpamAssassin is going to lower your performances on the self-learning part. And again, that may be perfectly okay if you're aware of that. As a matter of fact, my suggestion is to use a hybrid approach, by which, for example, you leave everything reaching SpamAssassin and having SpamAssassin make the decision, but rely on more aggressive XIM filtering based on DNSBL if your load goes too high. In that way, I think you have the best of both worlds in a way.
Fantastic. Okay, thanks for that. And in fact, our Heiko says thanks as well for answering that. So one more. What do you recommend as a security measure other than using DNSBLs?
I think it's important to look at full content scanning and analyzing the full results of the email. If you do that with DNSBLs or in a different way, that yeah, depends on what data source you select. One thing that I usually tell the people that something that they can and should look at are some basic policy decisions. Like, for example, do you really want to accept emails that contain an executable as an attachment? These are something where really there's no legitimate reason why somebody should send you a Windows executable as an attachment. And never mind how good your antivirus and all that stuff is. The more, to me, the more prudent and the more sane approach there would be to say, okay, this is not the place and the time for that sort of thing. So we're just never going to accept a mail like that. And there are a couple other things you can do, like around rate limiting, especially when you look at outbound mail. And another thing that was one of my personal favorites is that any IP that doesn't have reverse DNS set is probably not going to be legitimate sender. So there's some in that area. There's a couple of decisions you can make, and this all depends on sort of I guess your appetite for risk and how aggressive you want to be in certain things. But there's a lot on the policy side where you just say, okay, you know what, if you want to send mail to us, fine, but the least you can do is set up valid reverse DNS. And you can say, okay, it needs to have some value, or you can say it needs to have a value that when we resolve the value, it needs to point to the IP we connect to. There's all sorts of things you can do there. But there's definitely some gain to be had in that area. And if you to go back to the attachments part with the executables, most big free mails have been doing this for many years. For example, Gmail has been doing this for many years, where they say we just won't allow these kind of attachments. And I believe that's just a very, very good choice to make, and it will just save you a lot of trouble down the way. I mean, the best malware is the malware you don't get. So that's definitely something I would look into.
Anything to add, Manuele?
I think that Carter covered it all. I would agree.
Fantastic. Excellent. Okay, so we've got time for one final question, and that's come in from Joe, and it's just is DNSBL the only way you can use this data?
Okay, I'm picking that up. As a matter of fact, no. So DNSBL, the name itself, DNS block list, is just an indication of the way you're consulting the block list itself. It doesn't mean that everything needs to be working on DNS. And as a matter of fact, we already expose the same information through HTTP APIs, some basic APIs that are supposed to just provide the same type of information, that is basically yes and no, and some flags around it telling you, for example, if something is unwanted or blockable due to being inherently bad or abusive, or better said, abused. We also publish other APIs that are much richer in terms of information. For example, for all the compromised machines, compromised IPs, we can provide additional insight about the history of that IP, about the what that IP is supposed to be infected with, stuff like that. These, of course, are uses that are supposed to be useful in other scenarios other than email. Not because you can't use them inside email if you want to. It's just that unlike other sectors, email has a robust and historical support for the DNS protocol as the media to query this type of data. And so that is why we only covered the DNSBL part of it. But as a matter of fact, in any place in those slides where you see DNSBL written, you can just remove DNSBL and write spam house databases instead, and nothing would change.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, Skull. Well, that's everything. Thank you all for joining us. We appreciate you taking an hour out. We hope this has been helpful. We will be sending the recording and sharing that with you all over the next 24 hours. Hope you have a great day. Once again, thank you for joining us, and goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.